There is a decision people make that never looks like a mistake. It looks measured. It looks intelligent. It looks like restraint. It is the kind of decision that keeps everything intact. Life stays stable. Nothing collapses. Nothing demands explanation. From the outside, it appears responsible. And that is why it is so rarely questioned. Years later, when someone tries to account for why their life never quite arrived, why nothing decisive ever seemed to happen, this decision is almost never mentioned because it didn't ruin anything. It preserved everything exactly as it was. And that is how it quietly took everything that mattered. Most lives are lost at this exact moment. Not in collapse. Not in failure. In the moment you understand what your life is asking of you and choose, quietly, not to answer. You don't experience this moment as a turning point. You experience it as thoughtfulness, as discernment, as self-awareness. You tell yourself you're not rushing, that you're respecting complexity, that you're allowing more time before committing to something irreversible. What you're actually doing is something more specific. You're translating a requirement into a question, not because the requirement is unclear, but because answering it would change your life. A relationship makes a demand of you, so you ask whether you're ready. Your work makes a demand of you, so you ask whether the timing is right. A truth presents itself clearly, so you ask whether you understand it fully yet. The questions sound responsible. They feel mature, but they are not neutral. They are decisions disguised as inquiry. And because they don't sound like refusals, you don't experience them as choices at all. You remain close to life, close enough to observe it, to analyze it, to explain it, without ever stepping into it. You call this depth. You call it patience. You tell yourself you're waiting for the right moment. What you don't notice is that the road never split. There was no dramatic crossroads. You simply stopped walking. And from there, life does not collapse. It drifts. This posture doesn't feel like avoidance. It feels like intelligence. You're not running from responsibility. You're being careful. You're not saying no. You're staying open. Given what you know at the time, this makes sense. Commitment closes doors. Action ends possibility. Finality introduces risk. Why decide before you're certain? Why narrow your life prematurely? Delay feels like responsibility. And for a while, it works. You avoid obvious mistakes. You avoid visible failure. You avoid consequences you might not be able to reverse. You stay intact. The world rewards this. You're easy to work with. Easy to be around. You don't force decisions. You don't demand clarity. You don't push situations to the point where someone has to answer for them. So no one challenges your hesitation. They call it depth. They call it sensitivity. They call it discernment. Over time, this stops feeling temporary. Being uncommitted becomes your position. Not chosen once, maintained daily. Your hesitation is not punished because it doesn't force clarity on anyone else. Systems stabilize around people who never force a decision. If this feels uncomfortably familiar, pause here. Not to fix anything, not to promise yourself change, just to notice the pattern. And if this kind of examination matters to you, this is where people support the work. Not loudly, not performatively, but by staying with it, by subscribing, or by leaving a line in the comments that says simply, "I recognize this." Then we continue. Delay does not keep options open. It decides against reality by default. After the moment passes, nothing changes on the surface. You don't lose your job. Your relationship doesn't end. Your body doesn't break. Life continues. It moves away from action and towards talking about it. Not getting involved, just explaining. Not making a choice, but keeping all possibilities open as who you are. Years pass. You accumulate insights, observations, understanding. But not stakes. You tell yourself you're preparing to live, but preparation becomes your life. Not because you chose the wrong thing, because you never chose at all. You don't notice the loss immediately. You notice it later, when you realize that nothing broke, nothing collapsed, but nothing fully arrived. The life you refused to commit to became the life you have. By drift. Not a tragedy, just a life that could have narrowed and didn't. This pattern is not new. It has appeared before, with devastating clarity. In Copenhagen, 1841, Søren Kierkegaard, who was 28 years old at the time, was engaged to Regine Olsen. Life was beginning to take shape. Before this, Kierkegaard had written extensively about possibility as the highest form of freedom, as openness, as escape from limitation. After the engagement, something else becomes clear to him. Marriage does not require feeling. It requires actuality, ordinariness, visibility, ethical permanence. It requires becoming someone, not in theory, not in writing, but in life. And he understands this completely. There is no confusion. There is no misunderstanding about what is being asked of him. The moment arrives quietly, not when he ends the engagement, before that. A simple realization. This will require me to become actual. And in that understanding, he chooses not to refuse marriage outright, but to remain unresolved. Everything that followed, the letters, the explanations, the public rupture, those were consequences. The direction was already chosen. Here, at this moment. Uncertainty was passed to Regine. She carried the confusion. Meaning retreated into writing. Philosophy became a refuge. Life was lived as thoughts rather than participation. After this, the engagement could end. The writings could continue. But the logic governing his life could not return to innocence. Once you see what is required of you and choose to stay open instead of making a move, most lives are lost at this exact moment. Not because people choose wrongly, but because they don't choose at all. They mistake understanding for deciding, reflection for commitment, openness for integrity. And the moment passes. Not loudly, not visibly, but irreversibly. You are not responsible for certainty. You are responsible for the self you refuse to become. And that refusal happens here, in the moment you understand what is required and choose delay instead. The lie you tell yourself is not, "I'm waiting for the right moment." It is, "I'm keeping my options open." Options do not stay open. They decay. And eventually, the self you refuse to become becomes the self you are, by default. The moment you delay becoming yourself is never neutral. It never disappears. The question is no longer whether it happened. The question is it happening now? If this made you see something you hadn't named before, subscribe. There's more coming.